Everybody, thanks for joining us. What an amazing time to be in human spaceflight. You have to be asleep if you haven't heard the latest, greatest news. We landed successfully a robotic mission on the Mars surface. Perseverance is collecting a lot of data and information. We have the successful flight of a helicopter on another planet that has very little atmosphere, a huge engineering feat. We've made oxygen on Mars. We have US company, SpaceX is setting US astronauts and pretty soon commercial passengers into spaceflight. We've ushered in a brand new age of human spaceflight. And guess what? We are going back to the moon. NASA is now training the next generation of astronauts that will actually be part of the Artemis group of folks who will be taking us back to the moon in order to prepare us for being an interplanetary species. So it's a really exciting time, and spaceflight is becoming more and more accessible for us regular people even. And so what we've done is actually, we wanted to bring together this series to talk about the things that really impact our ability to go back to space and to be in space, to go back to the moon and be an interplanetary species. And so my name is Dorit Donoviel, and I have the pleasure of being your host and your moderator for today's discussion. It's the second of a monthly series called Why We Go. And you'll hear more about the other lectures coming up. My day job is actually being an associate professor at the Center for Space Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine. And I happen to also have the pleasure and honor of leading a NASA-funded institute called the Translational Research Institute for Space Health. And this institute basically is partnered with NASA to seek out the latest disruptions in health innovations. And we help extend the reach of NASA into communities of problem solvers that have not before engaged with the nation's space program. We're trying to reduce the risks to the health and human performance challenges that humans will be facing on a deep space mission. And what do I mean by deep space? Deep space means going beyond our low Earth orbit, or LEO for short, and going back to the moon. That's considered a deep space mission. And going to Mars, for example, that's another deep space mission. And we'll talk about what it takes for humans to do that in today's discussion. So the series is called Why We Go, and it's a collaboration between TRISH, our institute, and our friends at Arizona State University at the Interplanetary Initiative. We will talk candidly with experts about not only about the hard science, but the humanitarian aspects of human global space travel. We're going to be recording all the sessions, and those that have signed up for these series actually will get a link directly to the posted session, or you can search for it on ASU's YouTube channel or go to the TRISH website. The next two sessions are going to be really cool. On June 17th, we're going to be talking about the social aspects, the sociology and the legal aspects of Mars colonies. And on July 22nd, we're going to be talking about terraforming and really trying to separate fact from fiction. So please join us for those. It's going to be really exciting. Today, we're going to talk about why it is so difficult for humans to actually live for long periods of time in space. What are the challenges, and how can we mitigate for those challenges, and how, through some of the innovations that we're developing to mitigate for those risks to human health and performance on a long duration deep space mission, are actually impacting the health here on Earth as well. Before we move to the panelist, I want to introduce my partner in crime, Dr. Lindy Elkins-Tanton, who conceived of this series with me. Lindy is actually the Vice President of Arizona State University Interplanetary Initiative, and she is the principal investigator of the Psyche mission, which was selected out of many, many, many proposals by NASA in 2017. And she is going to be studying a really interesting asteroid, and her mission launches next year, so she's really busy. but she's managed to take time away from her schedule as a PI on this amazing discovery mission to talk to us a little bit about ASU and the work that they're doing at ASU Interplanetary Initiative. Lindy?
Thank you so much. And I think, Taryn, you've got slides for me, right? Perfect. Dorit, thank you so much for the introduction. And we are thrilled to be partnering with TRISH on this series. ASU's Interplanetary Initiative, what we're trying to do is deploy and teach new ways of solving complex problems at scale and across disciplines and sectors and cultures to shape a peaceful, equitable, and no, can you go back to Taryn? Thanks. To the other slide. So what we're trying to do is shape a peaceful and equitable future for humankind in an interplanetary way. And so we're trying to create a perspective that reaches beyond our own town, our country, our planet. And so getting ready to be interplanetary in all the ways that Dorit was talking about requires that we create networks of people, not just scientists and engineers, but people who are thinking about the sociology and the health and the psychology and the team dynamics, and in fact, the religion and philosophy and every other aspect of humans as we become interplanetary. So glad to be teaming and very excited for this session. If you'd like to be in touch, you've got our contacts right here above the Arizona State University logo. You can find us on the web very easily. So thank you very much. And Dorit, I'm going to turn it back over to you for the panel.
Thanks a lot, Lindy. This has been so much fun putting it together and inviting these amazing speakers. Before I introduce them formally and we get the discussion started, I invite all of you to participate via the Q&A feature on Zoom. I'm going to be monitoring that, and when we get through some of our questions and we have time, I'm sure we will make time at the end. We will attempt to address some of your questions, and if we didn't address something, feel free to send us an email, and we'll try to get back to you. Definitely make an effort to do that. So with that, I'm going to do a formal introduction. So what's exciting about today's two panelists is that they really kind of, in my mind, complement each other so well. Dr. Richard Jennings is a bona fide hardcore space doctor, physician, and Dr. Jennifer Fogarty is a bona fide hardcore space scientist and physiologist. And they both have been doing this for quite a while, and they have a wonderful perspective. Both of them worked at NASA at one point and then have now left NASA and are continuing to contribute to the field of space exploration in their own unique ways. And so I think it's a wonderful opportunity to hear from both perspectives on the hard science and the medical aspects together. So with that, I will introduce Richard first. Dr. Richard Jennings is a non-resident fellow at the Baylor Institute for Space Policy program at Rice University and a clinical professor in space medicine at the University of Texas Medical Branch. He is currently flight surgeon for Space Adventures, and I know that Richard consults for many other space flight companies. He'll tell you a little bit more about that himself. Dr. Jennings worked as a NASA flight surgeon from 1987 to 1995 and was chief of flight medicine clinic and chief of medical operations for the space shuttle, where he served as crew surgeon or deputy crew surgeon for 14 shuttle missions and provided direct mission support for 45 flights. This guy knows everything. And if you get a beer in him, he might tell you some stories. Dr. Jennifer Fogarty is Director of Applied Health and Extreme Environments at SOFIC Synergistics. And SOFIC is based here in Houston, and I've had a chance to engage with them. They do amazing work in human factors, and she could tell you a little bit more about that. Most recently, Dr. Fogarty was the NASA Human Research Program, HRP for short, chief scientist. And as chief scientist, Dr. Fogarty worked with all the elements on the development and oversight of research addressing the diverse human systems risks to health and performance. And so with that, I am going to open up the conversation. But before I turn it over to them to have them tell you a little bit more about themselves, I'm going to pose a fun question to get us kind of relaxed and going. I'm going to ask Jennifer first. Jen, would you go to Mars? And tell us why, yes or no.
Well, you know, my younger self probably would have had a more reflexive answer. but you realize life is a little more complicated. So you say, yes, if, or yes, and, I think is the right way to phrase it. As a scientist, no doubt about it. It is an opportunity to study humanity, and all the aspects, even fundamental biology, like on an evolutionary scale, like pressures in which, genes and gene background may facilitate, adapting in a way that is beneficial versus not, so it has its potentials and just is limitless with what you could study and try to interpret. As a mother, that's a really hard call to make. I used to travel extensively for the human research program because of all of our partnerships and areas of interest across the globe. It's an international space station. Space exploration is an international effort. It's going to take all of us, to be successful, and the diverse opinions that come from many different cultures and backgrounds and disciplines to really be successful at this. But I could be gone for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, several times, like most months, and I missed a lot. Could you imagine being gone for 3 years for the early mission? So that has very much tempered my idea of what I would do. But as you know, in the idea of colonizations, we wouldn't be sending necessarily individuals, the concept, and there's some really good sci-fi shows out there about families going together. And I think when we get to the later part of our conversation and some of your future conversations, it'll delve into what the sacrifices that will be made with the early explorers, and what we really need to still understand to be successful. So yes, and if I can have my cake and eat it too.
You bring Harrison with you. Bring Harrison with you, right?
Yeah, if I got to do my job I got to be in my scientist job and solve most of the risks and make it so that we can be productive and successful. So it's kind of yes, and there's a lot of work to do, but I think anyone who's in the space program is so inspired by it. I think most answers are yes, and then we think about it. And so yes, and.
Wonderful. Okay, Richard, your turn. Would you go to Mars?
Well, I'm a big believer that we need to become a multiplanetary species. There's no doubt about that. I kind of agree with Warren Ellis, who said that keeping all your breeding pairs in a single location is no way to run a species. I do think that we need to go to the moon and go to Mars and become a multiplanetary species, but it's not going to be easy. As you know, even at the closest, it's 150 times the distance to the moon, and that's the furthest we've been so far. And the trip out there is going to be, you're not going to have your normal food that you usually eat, fruits, vegetables, those sort of things. You're not going to be able to talk to your family back home. You're going to be confined inside. When you get there, the air is, the atmosphere is 1/100th of the density of Earth, but there's plenty of dust to settle on things. The main temperature is minus 80 degrees Fahrenheit, even though it might get up a little bit into above freezing at the equator at noon. It's going to be minus 100 degrees Fahrenheit at night. So very difficult. The first people that go are going to have to be really tough to go, and they're going to be special people that have multiple skills that they're going to have, because if you lose one, you've got to have someone else that covers their skills. And until we get permanent settlements and get enough equipment there, these first flights are going to be very arduous. Back to me, though, I'm too far along in the continuum from the cradle to the grave to fly to Mars now. And for radiation, that'd be ideal. As you know, when you go to the Curiosity rover, showed that when you go to Mars, and this affects pregnancy issues, that they had 300 millisieverts of radiation going in 180 days, and there'll be another 300 millisieverts coming back. That's equivalent to 50 CT scans of the body. That's a lot of radiation. I'm ideal for that, but
so is that a yes or no? I didn't quite get I'm not sure what your answer is. Is it yes or no, Richard?
I'm too old to go.
Okay, it's a no. Got it.
Sorry, I had to talk a lot.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Well, I mean, I think that our audience, we have a real mixed audience, but I think some of the folks joining us today, last time we had hundreds of people from all over the world. A lot of people, things that we take for granted that we know about, we just assume everybody knows, but they don't. So let's just take a step back a little bit and kind of explain to people. I'm going to start with you, Jen. people know that humans have been living in low Earth orbit on the ISS for 20 years. You know, they've been fine. They hear about them going. It's become routine right now, right? And we don't hear about any major medical events. So talk about, you know, what are the concerns still? Are there still concerns about people living on the ISS right now? Guess what? There's going to be movies made up there. Supposedly Tom Cruise is going up to the ISS. And just yesterday, I think, or the day before, a company, Discovery Channel, I think, is doing some kind of contest where people can do survivor game type things, and maybe they get to get a seat. The winner gets to go to the ISS. So regular people are going to go. So Jen, what do they need to worry about when regular people go to the ISS? What are the top 3 things that we're still concerned about on ISS?
Yeah, those are great questions. And I think, you know, I worked in space medicine for 10 years before and it was in a translational role. So I was trying to understand science to operations. Like, what did it mean? What did the data coming out mean? Would it change how the docs did what they did, or could anticipate change? Because that is the question. You have a moving background when you go, and we know a lot about it even from Earth. When you take someone going to an extreme environment, people climb Everest. Not everyone's successful. There were recently some deaths up there, and a lot more people are getting licenses to go. And then the question is, what about fitness? So we have a thing called like fitness for duty, which is above and beyond health. Are you capable of doing the job, and how do we keep you healthy? But there, you know, I mentioned it before about the pressures that are going on, and Richard alluded to it. You know, you're going to be experiencing some things and actually losing the experience of something. So microgravity, the body needs certain stimuli to stay the way it is here on Earth and function. But when you go into an environment that lacks gravity, your body is going to start adapting to that, which means it's going to stop investing in certain systems that are gravity, you know, required for gravity. So it's not necessarily, it's adaptive for the new environment. We often with spaceflight, and what you're getting at, is expect people to be able to transition pretty quickly. And that's not necessarily, that's where you might get into some trouble. We call it going uphill when you get launched, whether it be a highly trained, selected, and very healthy astronaut or a commercial participant. You know, there are some things you can't change with working out or, you know, pre-exposure. And the space motion sickness has one of them, trying to understand the inner ear. And how people's vestibular system really responds to that kind of dynamic environment and stimuli has been challenging. So we do know that, you know, it's a concern because you need people to be functional. So if you're feeling sick, dizzy, you know, you're not at your best when you're operating a very sophisticated computer or interacting with it. So I think, you know, vestibular system is still one of trying to help people transition and feel well quickly. Rather than say having to use medicines that just remedy the symptoms. And people are familiar with it here. Like imagine, I know a lot of people who prepare quite vigorously to go on cruises or, you know, a day out on a fishing boat, who know that they're susceptible to motion sickness. The poor ones are the ones who didn't anticipate it and don't have solutions with them, and they suffer a lot during the trip. Makes it not so pleasant. So back to the adaptation, once you get past that initial stimuli and maybe do well with medication called, you know, living better through chemistry. There's nothing wrong with that as long as it's done safely. When you're up there, your body's going to continue to transition. You know, it moves blood volume around. We know about that. Even the shape of the heart changes. And while it can be shocking, especially when the titles of the articles come out or it's run in the press, it's actually quite appropriate. And there's a good analogy on Earth. They did a study that compared hearts of runners to hearts of swimmers. And you're like, they're all elite athletes, and they were very different looking, and they functioned optimized to the sport. So I have to say that while it's a rough analogy, you become a bit more of a swimmer because you're neutrally buoyant. So the shape of your heart changes in that way. It can still be incredibly strong as long as you maintain a demand for that. Like, so we have people exercise, right? And a lot of this has to do with, we want to return you to Earth, and we want you capable when you return. So it's preparing for you for re-exposure to gravity. A lot of what we do, you know, is a lot of resource demand because we're trying to fight your adaptation to microgravity. So there's always that balance. And to me, that change is not the problem. Like, no one should fear change unless we understood it's taking you in a negative direction. We do know that there are some changes to the musculoskeletal system that probably don't completely reverse when you come back. And it's still a healthy debate as to what the significance of some of those changes are, because your body does compensate. And not to get too bogged down in the details, but it's a process. We know how, you know, human physiology and biology work with that respect, but we don't want to put someone compromise them for their future, their health or their well-being. Or we'd like to at least be able to understand what it is. And so there are still solutions being sought for what happens to your bone density. I don't think that's completely figured out. And the question when you go to exploration type flight is, will it continually get worse? You know, is there a point at which, I mean, we've had this question on the International Space Station and are trying to use the space station as our test bed that says, as people do the traditional 6-month-like mission, we have it pretty well characterized. We only have one person, well, 2 people who did 1 year, 1 US astronaut, 1 Russian cosmonaut. And it's really hard to make any extrapolation from an N of 1 or 2. So more people have to spend more time and understand the behavior of the system. You know, does it plateau, and can we understand, you know, where this system is going so that we can predict for something like a 3-year mission, most of which will be in microgravity, depending on how long they stay on Mars. So it's the musculoskeletal system is not the biggest risk, but it's still worth understanding so that the people can help themselves when they land on a planet, along with the neurovestibular, and come back to Earth and lead healthy, productive lives where we haven't done something that's kind of a permanent change that compromises them. And of course, I think the third one I would point out, and this is where I've always been concerned, that it is actually being in microgravity to the large part. We think that's the most significant lack of stimuli, is the space-associated neuroocular syndrome, which appears to be maladaptive, right? It's a part of the process of adapting to being in microgravity, but with respect to your brain and eyes, the changes seem to have a very negative connotation. The super bad thing hasn't happened yet. You know, we don't see it really going there, but we can't be sure. We don't know enough. It's been really hard to get data. It's hard to do the laboratory controlled invasive experiments that could occur on the ground.
Jen, just define for people really quickly what SANS is, that syndrome you just talked about.
Sure. So what we first noticed, and I'll talk about it a little bit backwards, because it always starts like with your sentinel case. And we had known that even shuttle crew members had some changes in their vision. It seemed very minor. It was mainly remedied by changing glasses. You know, they couldn't see close up, so we put stronger and stronger magnifying lenses on them. And they were tested afterward, and it didn't seem to, you know, linger, the changes. They recovered. So going into space station, which was magnitudes longer, you know, shuttle was anywhere from 10 days, 17 days for extended duration, but shuttle station started out, you know, 2 months, then quickly went to 4 months and 6 months. And then 6 months is kind of our nominal flight time. And now we're even getting more extensions due to vehicle traffic or whatever might be going on. So people are definitely staying up there longer. After about 2010-ish, you know, we had crew members come back, and we were always doing a lot of, the medical side was doing their surveillance. You know, there's really an occupational health model going on here, appropriately so. And they noticed some changes to the back of the eye, not just, you know, your prescription changed and maybe how your lens was changing, which dictates, you know, what kind of glasses you might wear. But this change to the back of the eye became very concerning and was not ever something that we expected to see. So you started looking for it more, we started finding it more. And then of course we had always been looking at the brain, but you kind of, you know, increase the amount of interrogation through things like MRI, CT scans. We are careful with CT scans because they are radiation. So we try to stick to non-radiation based imaging, but you do see, you can measure change, a variety of different change. Interpreting the change in the brain in the back of the eye has been really challenging, but anytime a tissue gets larger, what appears swollen, and starts to impact a function like vision, that's very concerning. And that's where that phrase maladaptive, like something has shifted here that's taking people down a path where they might be compromised, their function might be compromised, and we don't know that this tissue is going to be able to recover and return to baseline. And if it doesn't stay at baseline, what does it mean for that person's future? So SANS has really been a challenge to understand, characterize. A lot of individual variability makes it hard to predict how bad someone might maladapt versus not. We think we see some trends between, males and females, but we don't fly many females, so we just may not, some of this is like, we don't want to get caught up in the math. We have to respect the biology and the physiology. So the surveillance continues today. As you mentioned, I left the program recently from my leadership role, but it's quite a robust program to characterize it. So those are the big three that really need to be addressed. For commercial flyers, most of these missions appear to be short duration. So they're in that flux area.
Yeah.
A lot of it is.
Let's let Richard talk about that next.
Sure.
Thanks, Jen. So I'm just going to summarize for people, and that was fantastic. And I hope all of you caught all that, but I'll summarize for those of you who didn't catch everything. Jen named sensory motor adaptation, your balance to zero gravity, the musculoskeletal system, and SANS, this condition on the eye, as her top three. So that was, just really important, a lot of important information there. And she has the perspective of having been overseeing all the risks that NASA is concerned about from the human perspective. So that was a really insightful list from her. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Richard. Richard was a flight surgeon and supported so many astronauts going to space, and is now transitioned to supporting more regular people, commercial spaceflight passengers. And so, Richard, give us kind of your perspective, how things are different when you're dealing with an astronaut versus a commercial passenger. What are your major concerns in keeping humans healthy when they're not exactly perhaps as well screened, or maybe some of them have conditions? I know you've told me about some challenges with some of your passengers, but I know you're always working towards everybody can fly. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, thank you. I first want to mention that you talked earlier about we haven't really had any problems on orbit and everybody seems to have done well. And I think you have to give credit to NASA and the international partners for their preventive medicine programs, their selection criteria, and then as people do develop problems, their ability to mitigate risk. They really should be congratulated for that and their ability to not have problems on orbit. Commercial spaceflight participants right now, for the most part, are either going to fly in free flyers for a few days in low Earth orbit, or there's one schedule, as you know, Dear Moon, around the moon, which would be a 6-day or 7-day type mission. The others are going to go on one of the capsules, either the Soyuz or Crew Dragon, or even with Boeing, to the International Space Station, where they come under the criteria for selection and health of the international partners. The difference, though, is that almost all of these flights are short. These individuals, we don't have to worry about them having a 15 or 20-year career. They don't have specific safety-related functions. They don't have to fly the vehicle or run the International Space Station. So that gives us a lot more leeway. And the other thing that they provide is the word opportunity. We really, if we're going to take care of people on Mars in 0.38 Gs, or we're going to take care of people for a year going back and forth to Mars, where do we learn how to take care of illnesses that develop in people? And they do. People develop diabetes, people develop heart disease or have heart attacks. People do develop things, and we have very little experience of doing that in space. The commercial spaceflight participants give us the opportunity to see what happens to people with well understood risk mitigated conditions when they fly in space. And that gives us an opportunity to prepare for Mars and other missions. They also don't have any career interests, which makes it great because they will let us publish their stories so they can help the ones who follow behind them. And we've had 3 of them that have allowed us to publish their entire story. And I think this has actually had some impact on the kind of conditions that NASA and the international partners will let fly when these flights, and again, it may be that we had luck, but they basically did very well. So the commercial spaceflight participants, they pay their way, they have no career interest, their flight is in a defined time, it's a short flight, and it's a great opportunity for all of us to learn about medicine in space, clinical medicine in space.
Great, thanks, Richard. What types of, this is a question for both of you. Let's talk a little bit about the psychological aspects of space flight. And again, it really matters what kind of mission you're talking about, right? The short duration, you can pretty much put up with anything. We all know that. We sometimes gone on vacation with people we don't get along with, and we could put up with anything, even family members over holidays. But when you're kind of in a situation where that mission duration is extended and you're in conditions where you're not very comfortable, if you will, and you're facing great dangers perhaps or lots of challenges, how does the agency prepare people for the psychological challenges of being in space flight, and talk about the different duration flights that NASA is thinking about? Start with you, Jen.
Okay.
You want what? Start with you, Jen.
Sure. Yeah, and yeah, we're definitely going to have different sources of information. We might wind up at a similar place, because I know we do listen very carefully to the operations community, both the astronaut corps themselves, the flight surgeons. I mean, they are, you know, the people having to experience it and implement the solution. So you want to be very respectful of that. But as you said, the missions of the future are not what's happening today. So you're trying to draw some conclusions and know your limits of them, and kind of what are best practices and do those translate. So I think, you know, from my perspective and my experience base, that the selection process uses like real world application once they get down to a small enough pool of potential applicants who meet all the other criteria about the team interaction. How do you function in a team? And what we know the operations side has stressed, and the research side similarly stressed, was the ability to move between a leadership and a followership role, that you can manage your ego. So it's, you know, it's IQ and EQ, your emotional quotient, is equally as important in understanding your role along the continuum of what the mission requires, demands, and your ability to shift. And also respect boundaries. You know, these vehicles are relatively small. The International Space Station has a relatively large habitable volume. The exploration crafts in these capsules that are moving do not. These are some serious tight quarters. There's no privacy, you know, and you're going to have to come to terms with some stuff. And this is not uncommon with, again, like extreme environments and exploration of today, whether it be deep sea or, you know, high altitude. But it is usually for much longer durations, and other, you know, as you mentioned, stressors that are driving emotions and responses that, you know, are happening on the same time scale, right? So the person is managing a lot of stressors. So we talk also about reserve and resilience, your ability to come back from something negative or a conflict, and reevaluate how you're going to function as a team and your role in the team. So those are the key attributes in real life. So putting them out on, you know, camping trips and survival states, even for short periods of time, give the selection group enough data to start to see how you can talk a lot about how you think you will respond. They're going to put it to the test. And then when you're in the astronaut corps, it becomes a continuous process. And not always are you always interacting with other astronauts. You have trainers and scientists who, you know, your behavior, I think, on all cases are always being examined for how you function in high stress dynamic environments. That's why they still continue the T-38 program. It's not just about flying a vehicle. It's about putting yourself in dynamic situations with various people from various backgrounds, because, you know, you have the pilot, which usually come in, say, more from a military background, but the backseaters could be a physician, it could be a geologist, it could be a psychologist. You know, it's whoever else has been picked to be in the astronaut corps, and the corps is getting increasingly more diverse, because, you know, the mission is science. The mission is operators who can go execute the work. A lot of the vehicles have a significant component of autonomy, or automation, I should say, so that it requires different skill sets. And you can cross-train. I think Richard's point of people being accepting of, we all have a role in this, and there's a reason to have hierarchy. Somebody has to make the decision and the ultimate call, especially when it's the hard one that they look to, that gives them guidance. But overall, it tends to be when you look at exploration, a much more flat organization that, again, leadership and followership may change. So it is a different set of characteristics that someone has to build, and that consistent concept for the long haul missions of resilience, because I think deprivation is going to occur. You don't have, we're trying to figure out from a research perspective, how do we mimic a lot of the stimuli you get on Earth, whether it be, the sound of the wind, the feel of grass at your feet, the smell of the ocean, whatever people feel good about and seek. But there's going to be a limit to the artificial representation of that in AR and VR. But the key is that they will be able to sustain lack of contact with family, they can look forward to things, which is what you were alluding to. We all can kind of, if I can see light at the end of the tunnel, I can get myself to X, that amount of time. But these durations are so extensive that to manage that lack of stimuli or deprivation from things that really speak to you as a human is incredibly challenging, and will challenge the people and their interaction amongst each other.
Great, thanks. Richard, I know you have thoughts around psychological and behavioral health. What are your thoughts on this in terms of?
I think Dr. Fogarty did a great job of covering that. I'll talk a little bit more about what happens when a commercial spaceflight participant comes right off the street. And I do think that the Russians do a great job. They have a quote that you need to eat a lot of salt together. And so having people eat together, work together, and find out who's compatible is really important. That's one of the things we didn't do so well at NASA during the shuttle program. I'm sure they're doing a lot better, but crews are kind of thrown together pretty arbitrarily. And even something as a neat Nick and a slob working together can be irritating to folks. But the Russians, I think, do a great job. They take 6 months trying to learn the language, and language is becoming a big issue now, where you have crew members who don't speak English at all, don't speak Russian at all, and trying to put together missions and making it work is difficult. I think that'll be an issue, probably not for going to Mars, but some of these short duration missions, language is going to be very critical. But you have someone who's, say, a billionaire, and they come into training. Well, the Russians do some things that medically may not be that important, but I think psychologically they are. They put them in an altitude chamber and take them to 10,000 meters. They put them in an altitude chamber, that's on with a mask. They put them in an altitude chamber on air and take them to 5,000 meters. I think that's a test, for claustrophobia and how they handle instructions. Some people who've been rich for a long time or been privileged for a long time often don't understand the word no. And it's important that you find out that they can understand the word no. They also put them in a centrifuge and take them up to 8 Gs. Again, they're given instructions and asked to do things during that time. But that's a pretty good test when you can take someone to 8 Gs and they're smiling and they're doing a great job and their heart rate doesn't go up too much. It's a nice test. The same way with the vacuum chamber. The Russians put them in a vacuum chamber. And then they do things like water survival, winter survival. And by the time you get through all of that, you have a pretty good idea how this person handles things. And then you find out, can they form as a team? Many sims, suited, unsuited, that they do. And you find out, are you comfortable with this person flying in space? So I think what they do is pretty good. A rotating chair does nothing, I don't think. I don't think we can predict space motion sickness from a rotating chair or treat it. On the other hand, as a flight surgeon and as someone watching a crew member you're going to take care of, I like to know how they handle adversity. Do they suck it up and just work with it, or do they strike out at other people? What happens when they're ill? What happens when they're made sick? So even though I don't think it has any medical importance, I think it does as a crew surgeon from the psychological side. And so I like these NOLS type courses with these commercial crews. I think SpaceX is doing some of that type of thing, some team building. And it may be that occasionally a crew member will have to be replaced because of lack of compatibility. It's better to find out on the Earth than in space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a confession to make. I think I would make a poor crew member. I get very hangry when I don't get my food, my meals on time. Let's talk a little bit about food. Let's talk about that. People sort of don't really understand the nature of the challenge. They think that NASA's figured it out. Everything's going to be foil packed and freeze dried and sent up to space. Jen, talk about food in terms of the need for fresh foods, the capabilities, long duration, et cetera. It's so important, especially to me.
Yeah, and that is, so that's another one, like, you know, another slice of humble pie served up by biology and humanity. All Earth exploration missions, when you read any of those books, and there have been some fabulous ones written, really significantly hinge on food. You know, even you go back to scurvy, like preventing disease, like having the right diversity of food, the bionutrients that we all need. And now we're going to talk about microbiome and how your food consumption matters for proper microbiome. And that's another, you know, variable that's changing over time as well. We could deep dive into another podcast or two. But could be very important for your psychological well-being as well as your physical health. So people are trying to dissect those things out and figure out where the real key points are to target with food. But I think when you back up, you could do a ton of work, and there will be a ton of work done probably to prove this point, that at the end, we know what you should take. But the challenge is being able to take it in a spacecraft. So, you know, ISS has solved some of this problem by what's called bonus packs, sending up essentially fresh food with some periodicity, you know, with the vehicles that are able to be launched and resupply. When they do surveys, and a lot of clearly our psychological surveys of the crew over the decades have always asked about food and or asked for the context around things, which food is mentioned in. So I think if you have the luxury of doing a search through one of the NASA databases and you want to know about how many times food is mentioned, you're going to see an incredibly high number. One, Richard's point of people eating together, that is a team cohesion. That's an important thing. Families know that. You know, in the International Space Station, again, it's large enough they can go off and not see each other necessarily during the day, especially the international partners are all working in their own modules. They really make a point of coming back together and uniting and kind of having those moments together. Celebrations are there. Those are important milestones. Anyone who's done, you know, ops psychology or research is going to identify key things that humans need and do. Some of it has a cultural basis, but it's unified across many cultures, you know. So food is huge. Getting fresh food and growing food on orbit has been incredibly challenging. So that when you go exploration and you can't do resupply anymore, how do you have that kind of turnover, and how do you have textures and that concept of freshness? Prepackaged meals ready to eat, you know, which are the known MRE style that came out of the military, which are high calorie density foods, you know, that are just meeting the caloric need, the energy equation that is, you know, the human metabolism. The deal is that it's so much more than that food over the long haul for exploration. We have a huge challenge in human space flight to really address that. I think if that is not addressed, you know, your point of being hangry, these, you know, it's a fundamental need. It's called Maslow's hierarchy. And when you undercut that, when I mentioned resilience before, you have put someone, you've taken a big chunk out of resilience when you have removed such a basic human need, which is feeling secure and satiated by your food. And then that food should be nutritious, which we all know is very challenging with preserved foods. Preserved foods over time continue to lose nutrients, so it's not ideal. So then you change the balance of disease state. You know, Richard was talking about, like, health is a continuum. It will change over time. And you can push it and pull it in different directions by managing risk factors like nutrition. You know, there's so much great work that has gone on, sponsored by NASA and the international partners in this area. It's staring us in the face. But we've really had a challenge with saying, you know, the hard work going on growing. We've got like plants and lettuce and, like, you know, fluid dynamics and microgravity are challenging. It makes it hard for the roots to stay healthy and the leaves to stay healthy. So, you know, it's high risk. You're growing crops could fail. Now, what do you do? So this is a huge obstacle. That's, you know, the human interface, going back to human factors engineering, like it needs to be addressed in a more holistic manner. And it's not trivial. I think thinking you're going to eat food bars, you know, for 3 years is not appropriate. And, you know, a throwdown kind of statement. It's, you can say that, I guarantee you, it will result in some disastrous consequences. And most people agree, which is why there's a significant amount of work there. But, you know, balance that up against building rockets and capsules. It sometimes gets a little shorted in the criticality of things.
That's Wonderful. Thank you. Richard, you're an expert in reproduction. We often get questions on this, particularly about women, that go up in space. How do they manage themselves? How is reproduction and reproductive health in men and women in space? What do we know about it? And everybody's always asking, is there sex in space? I'm not going to ask you to talk about that, but at least you could talk about reproduction. And as we're thinking about Mars and colonies on Mars and the reduced gravity, would a pregnancy be sustained in a reduced gravity environment? I think even Hollywood made a movie about that. So talk a little bit about reproductive health.
Well, it's an important issue. And then before the first flight of Sally Ride back in 1977, NASA does what it always did. They formed a large committee to review what she should do for menstruation in space. And Ray Kaufman was the chair of the Department of Baylor, was one of those people. And I think Ellen Baker was there. But over the years, we've had a lot of experience since Sally Ride's first flight, I think in 1983. And menstruation has gone fine in space. There's been no problems, and the women use the same products that you'd use on Earth. But it is inconvenient, and with the ISS and with Mir, the Russians really didn't, and it's not a problem, we know, truthfully, but they didn't want menstruating women using their waste collection system because the water was being recycled. And so for the last many years, we've tended to do menstrual suppression for space flight, just as a convenience. And that can be done with oral contraceptives, continuous, or a progesterone-containing IUD. Birth control pills have a small concern with increased clotting potential, and particularly if someone has a thrombophilia. But those have both worked well over the years, and progesterone-containing IUDs work well. We don't know much about the outcomes of men who've flown into space. As far as I know, unless Dr. Fogerty has more data, I don't think we've ever looked at reproductive outcomes from the men who've flown into space. We have on the women, though. And a few years ago, we did a review of the pregnancies that occurred in women who'd flown in space. And there were 33 pregnancies that resulted in 18 viable deliveries. And there were 15 miscarriages. That sounds awful high. That's a 43% miscarriage rate. But when you look at the average age of both the women who miscarried and the women who had the deliveries, it was 41. And because of age-related non-disjunction that occurs in women who are older, that's about the normal rate. We also did genetic studies of 2 of the abortions, aborted material from the miscarriage, and both were trisomies. They were the more lethal trisomies than you would see, say, in a Down syndrome child, which is trisomy 21. These were other trisomies. And so that was what we expected. You have older people, and the mean age was between 37 and 47 for these women who had the babies. So we think that it's okay, but there is a problem here. When you have a woman comes into the astronaut office and say they get their Ph.D., they become a test pilot, they're a doctor, they've done a residency, and they've worked in the space program 3 years, and then they come in, then they've got to train for another 2 or 3 years. They want to do a flight, and they get assigned to a flight that's 2 or 3 years in the future. And what always happens to flights? They always move later. And so then they come in, now they're 41 and they want a baby right now, and it doesn't work very well when you're 41. So NASA appropriately, and I think they should be praised for this, started letting our younger female astronauts do oocyte or embryo freezing. This gives you the fertility of those embryos and oocytes is essentially set at the age that you collected them. It also, when you do IVF, it gives you the ability to rule out genetic defects. So if there was a trisomy, that's not the embryo you would transfer. And NASA should be praised for that, I think. The trouble with pregnancies on the way to Mars or whatever, and I think right now we need to ensure that people don't get pregnant. And again, it's not like I mentioned, when you have 300 millisieverts of radiation on the way to Mars, that's a lot for a pregnancy. It's way, way, way beyond anything that the ICRP or the NCRP would recommend. And then even when you get to Mars, the radiation per day is about 0.7 millisieverts per day on the surface, less than in space because the planet itself blocks some of the radiation. But to be equal to Earth, you're going to have to be like under about 16 feet of lunar material, regolith and whatever, to make it the same as on Earth. So I don't think we're there for Mars yet. I think we will be. I think it's critical that we do that. And I think it's critical that we start doing the research now. People like John Steller at UCI, University of California, Irvine, are doing radiation research now, particulate radiation in mice models. And there's a lot of work going on. But from a clinician like me or a flight surgeon, my job right now is to make sure they don't get pregnant on the way to Mars.
Fantastic. Thanks for that wonderful answer. I think you addressed some of the questions that are coming in. People are asking about radiation. I hadn't gotten to that yet. That's the elephant in the room. And you know, we really just touched a little bit about radiation, but I do want to. We now have 10 minutes left, and there's been just a ton of questions coming in. So I'm going to pause for a second and take some of these questions. Let's see. Microbiome. Do we want to talk a little bit about the microbiome and how important that is in terms of a closed environment and the lack of fresh foods? Jen, you want to take that?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, this is it's the wild west microbiome, right? There's lots of things you can measure. What microbes in what amount in what interaction result in good things, right? There are some generalities, which is why probiotics exist and prebiotics exist, and they're putting them on the market. Like there's information that guides you. You kind of nudge it in a direction. Clearly, you go on antibiotics and you wipe out your internal microbiome, you run into trouble. And then some people have to go as extreme as something like a fecal transplant to get it back. You know, I mean, but most of us, between eating and being out in the environment and experiencing microbes, you can get back to some balance, but you may struggle with it. So we know when it gets out of balance, and then we do different things, kind of feed it all the raw materials and try to get it to balance itself, right? It's been very hard to it's not like a laser focused effect. Now in the vehicle scenario and in exploration, you're dealing with microbiome of a built environment, and you've done some pre-selection, right? And in spite of a current article that went out or a headline I saw some friends, we sanitize as much as possible. It's never going to be zero. We can't sterilize the people before they go. So we bring stuff with us. That's the fact. The deal is that the crew members then kind of share their microbiome with each other. It's like living in a house with other people. You're going to acquire each other's microbiome to an extent. And, the problem is that in exploration, it doesn't get refreshed, and this is where you start to overlay multiple stressors or hazards, in this case, confined environment, people sharing a microbiome, which one may not really help another person. So you may run into a microbiome conflict there, but people should be able to regulate a little bit if you give them the raw materials. It's that they're lacking a way to get fresh microbe exposure. In some ways, food can do that. Actually, grown plants can be a source of that because the seeds themselves carry their own microbiome. So you can carry seeds, they're protected in the shell to some extent, there's still studies going on. But you mentioned something before that kind of, again, is the elephant in the room, which is an exposure, a hazard. It itself is not a risk, it is a hazard. It's called radiation. We know radiation can do damage in two different ways to living things. One is chromosomal or DNA damage, breaks, which could cause a cell just to die, or it could mutate and proliferate, right? There's variations on that. And the other one is by causing free radicals. And we know in the body, if you're going to cause free radicals, that cause inflammation. Well, if you're going to grow a plant, there's also going to be a biological effect of radiation exposure. So, you're kind of trying to find ways to measure all these things and understand, okay, on the ground under laboratory controlled conditions, how does the interaction work and what leads to good? And then when you change a bunch of the variables and you put them in a space flight, can you still figure out how to nudge everything in the direction of good? And what would you have to send? Something like prebiotics, probiotics, vegetables that could produce a microbiome while you go. That is how we think we're going to help the microbiome process without having every detail figured out. So it's a big challenge between the vehicle itself and the humans inside to find the right way to balance. And I have Dorit frozen on my screen. Richard, do you see?
That's correct, frozen.
One of her folks can jump in.
Yeah, go ahead, Richard. Maybe you take up a little more time while Dorit gets
Okay.
the tea.
Well, one of the things about the food, and I think that's important. I do believe we need to grow food on the way to Mars and on Mars surface. But I grew up on a farm, and occasionally we had crop failures, and so you have to keep that in mind. Interestingly, the healthy food that you'd have on Earth with vegetables and fruits and nuts, whole grain cereals, and maybe a dab of lean meat, that's not the kind of food we're going to have on the way in space. And we tend to have foods that are higher in fat, higher in carbs, and previously, and a little bit adjusted now, high in salt. So and one of the other things we see, and until she comes on, one of the other things we see is, it's interesting is particularly in the commercial spaceflight people, when you quit exercising, you don't drink much water because the overhead is so high, and you go on a low residue diet, what happens? You get constipation. That's been one of the big issues with commercial spaceflight people, is that you're just totally changing their diet. You're totally cutting out their exercise and their fluids to a large degree. And in the first day or two, that they may not be able to eat much due to space motion sickness. And so we need to do a better job with food. I recently looked at maybe 20 people that were going to maybe fly in space, and their favorite foods and the foods they hated from different cultures. And this is going to be very hard to accommodate everybody, because this is like a shotgun blast. It's all over the place of what people want and don't want. So pleasing everybody is going to be tough.
Yeah,
that is for sure. Listen, while we're waiting for, oh, Dorit, are you back? Oh, fantastic. Sorry, carry on. I was just about to start the questions because we just have a few more minutes.
No voice.
But you're muted.
I'm so sorry. My internet crashed on me with 5 minutes left. Thanks for jumping in, Lindy.
No worries. I didn't really do
apologize.
anything. Carry on.
Okay. Well, gosh, it's really hard for me to read all the questions now. I apologize to those of you who sent in questions. We are going to try to address them. If you can please do us a favor and send us an email with your question, we will attempt to answer them. I'm so sorry about this. We only have a few minutes left and remaining. I'm glad it happened at the end. I want to leave with something fun. I want to give Dr. Fogarty and Dr. Jennings an opportunity to tell us about their favorite space movie gaffe, something that Hollywood does not know about the reality of space flight. So if you're still on, I don't see you, Richard and Jen, but if you'd like to share, Jen, why don't you tell us about your favorite space movie gaffe and why?
There's a lot of those. It is really frustrating. I actually don't watch a lot of those movies because my level of frustration. But I will tell you, I do like The Martian. I really enjoyed The Martian. The gaffe that I think is in there is how many times he almost killed himself drove me crazy. Like knowing the training and the safety and the rigor and the life cycle testing, the fact that he used the same port to get in and out, in and out, in and out, the one that ultimately tore, I was like, oh, he would have known. No, you need to know you can only use that so many times. You needed to switch to the other one before that thing was going to tear up. It drove me, those little details. But yeah, there's quite a few, but I'll pick on that one a little bit, like life cycle testing and how those people are trained. And I actually asked the author about it when I got to meet him at Space Center Houston, and I said, was there things you would change now that you've interacted so much with? And he's like, oh yeah. But also dramatic effect matters when they make movies, so they suspend reality for a little while. But yeah, coming out that airlock and that airlock tearing, I was like, that drove me a little crazy.
Awesome. Richard, what's your favorite space movie gaffe?
Well, I give directors a lot of leeway. 2001: A Space Odyssey had Arthur Clarke as a helping, and it was great for that. I like Gravity because it's just beautiful, yet there's so many errors in that. I won't get into that. The one I'm going to pick is from The Martian. I have 450 aerospace movies, but I'll pick that one because the dust storm that started that whole deal where things are flying through the air, their places being destroyed, that can't happen. The highest the wind gets on Mars is about 60, and it's 1/100th the density of the Earth. And yes, there's electrostatic charge on those fine dust particles and they'll settle on things, but there's no way that happens as depicted in the movie Martian.
And with that, folks, there you have it. But Hollywood is going to be making movies on the ISS, so we'll see what happens. Anyway, folks, thanks for joining us. And if you missed any of the conversation, apparently I did. I missed a few minutes myself. You can catch this recording in a few days' time. We'll be posting it on ASU's YouTube channel, or you can find it on the TRISH website. You'll also get an email to you if you signed up for this. You will receive a copy of the links. And with that, I want to thank Dr. Jennings and Dr. Fogarty. Thank you so much for the time you spent with us. We can talk for days and days and days. I know you two have so much more to share with us. Join us for the next one on sociology. And the one after that, I think will also be really exciting to talk about terraforming, separating the fact from fiction. And with that, folks, that wraps us up. Thank you for joining us, and send us your questions. I apologize for not being able to get to everything, but I promise we will do our best. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Dorit. Thank you, Dr.
Thank
Jennings.
you.